Welcome to NHL Wraparound Quick Takes. This is the 29th installment of Spring Cleaning. The Colorado Avalanche were the President's Trophy winners in 25-26 with 121 points, 8 better than second-place Carolina. In the playoffs, they beat the Kings 4 straight, beat Minnesota in 5, and then shockingly got swept by the Vegas Golden Knights in the Western Final. And they have not made the Stanley Cup Final since winning the Cup in 2022. When we did our summer coolers back in August, Neil, the expectation, Stanley Cup or bust. And really, how could it be otherwise? Because starting with that Stanley Cup season in 21-22, they averaged 111.6 points over those seasons.
As far back as you can remember, if you're younger, the Colorado Avalanche have been a perennial contender. When they first overall got Nate MacKinnon and then Cale Makar and on, and they've just seemed to be good forever. But this was a stunner in the playoffs this year that they would go out 4 straight. It would be a stunner to me if they'd lost in 7, but it's a shocker that they went out in 4.
Here's the reality and recap of their season. They started 31-2-7. And in that start, that included 2 10-game win streaks. They were 24-14-4 over their final 42 games. Terrific, but not as good as that torrid start. They were in that rarefied air of not only leading the NHL in goals scored, but goals against average, combination of Scott Wedgwood and Mackenzie Blackwood. They were the only team not to lose 10 home games in regulation and had a league best 7 regulation losses on the road. They led the league in penalty killing, but they were 27th on the power play with that arsenal. How does that happen?
You've got to almost guess or surmise that they're looking for the perfect play all the time. These guys are so high skilled that they're always looking to pass it around, move it around for the perfect play. And by the time you look, the 2 minutes is over. That's the only thing I can come up with because it's basically an all-star cast on their power play.
A matter, as a lot of people said about this team, just trying to pass the puck into the net when they had the man advantage and trying to paint a Rembrandt.
Like our friend in Tampa Bay, Nikita Kucherov. We always talk about that he tries to do things too perfectly. And I think this is what happens sometimes when you get this many good players on the ice. You know, even Nate MacKinnon said, well, maybe I shouldn't shoot. I'll give it over to Makar. And Makar's like, well, maybe I shouldn't shoot. You know, I'll give it to this one and I'll give it to that one. And by the time they look around, it's over. Jared Bednar, I'm sure, has an idea of why they aren't successful on the power play, but it was almost funny that they could be so far out in front and have the 5th worst power play.
Let's talk about some of those star players on this Avalanche team. Nathan MacKinnon, league leading 53 goals and was 3rd in points with 127. Marty Necas reached 100 points for the first time in his career. Brock Nelson, 30-plus goals for the 4th time. And Cale Makar, 3rd in defense scoring with 79 points. But then it all went south in the conference final. MacKinnon only 2 assists. Necas only 2 assists. Makar, no points in his last 6 games of the postseason, going back to the Minnesota series. He had an upper body injury suffered in the second period of Game 5 in a collision with Matt Zuccarello. And Brock Nelson, no points in his last 5 games and a -4. Gabe Landeskog, back and looking fully healthy from that knee injury, scored in 3 of the 4 games for Vegas. Nazem Kadri had 3 points. And Devon Toews had 3 as well, but simply not enough. And this kind of reminded me of what happened to Dallas in the conference final against Edmonton last year, where many of their big guns all dried up at the wrong time.
Yeah, they all seem to be squeezing their stick all at the same time and all getting nervous. I don't know if it can be conveyed from one player to the other, but yeah, these great players, they all seized up at the same time, and the unexpected certainly happened, and that was that they just couldn't get going. Something they'll have to live with now until October.
When you look at the start that they had, 29 games, over 500, after less than half of the season had been played, there really wasn't a lot of adversity because they were the front runner from day one to win the President's Trophy. They get through the first 2 rounds in only 9 games. And when they met up against a stiff Vegas team, they were unable to execute.
Absolutely right. And the other thing that we need to talk about or need to think about is that 2 years ago, Chris MacFarland fixed their goaltending very quickly. Their goaltending was not good, and they quickly got rid of both their goaltenders and brought in both Wedgwood and Blackwood. Obviously, their goaltending was okay for them to win the President's Trophy by this much. But you get to the playoffs, and you got to think, like, was Wedgwood and Blackwood the level of goaltender of the players in front of him who are a star cast? Certainly neither of those guys are star goaltenders in the league. They're very adequate NHL goaltenders, but they're not Patrick Roy or Marty Brodeur for sure. So you wonder if that was another thing that went into the collapse of the Avalanche.
But when you look at their goaltending in 22, it was Darcy Kemper, who was not a star goalie in the league. And then the following year, Vegas wins with Adin Hill, who had no playoff experience entering that. So I think the mindset is if you get adequate goaltending, it's probably going to be enough.
Well, absolutely. I'm not saying these guys couldn't have won the cup. I'm just saying their goaltending probably wasn't up to the level that the rest of their team was, but you can win. You make a great point. They'd won in 22 with Darcy Kemper. Then Darcy Kemper has now been with 2 other teams since then. He was with Washington and now he's on LA. And I don't think LA is very happy with him right now. So yes, you can win the Stanley Cup as just an adequate goaltender. And they certainly had at least adequate goaltending.
Let's look ahead at the work Chris MacFarland has ahead of him. And this is very intriguing here, Neil. And even though people can't see it, you've got your Nordiques hat on, but you're going to have to put a GM hat on for this one. This is the oldest team in the NHL. They have no players on their roster under 25. Word is out that Cale Makar might miss the start of the 26-27 season, that the injury may be a little bit more serious than we have been led to believe, although in the end game that may become a benefit by the time we get to the playoffs in 2027. But when I looked at the way they're set up for the draft this year, they had a notation after every single round. They have 8 picks in 2026, but they won't be picking until the 4th round. And through the 2028 draft, they have only 2 picks in rounds 1 through 3. Their first round pick this year traded to the Islanders as part of acquiring Brock Nelson at the 2025 deadline. The Isles subsequently dealt that pick to St. Louis in order to acquire Braden Shen. They have no second-round pick. That was part of the Mackenzie Blackwood, Alexander Georgiev swap in December of 2024. Their third-round pick was traded to Minnesota to acquire forward Brandon Duhaime, who is now a current UFA with Washington. And their sixth-round pick was traded to Ottawa for Kevin Mandolese, who currently has no NHL deal. So you're going into this older team, and you're not picking until deeper in this year's draft.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough for Chris MacFarland and his staff. Obviously, they pushed all their chips into the middle of the table to try to win, and I'm not sure that I wouldn't have done the same thing with this team. But now you've got to pay the piper. When the summer comes, it's not going to be fun this year running the draft when no picks. It's horrible when you sit at a draft and you don't have a pick, even in any round, just to sit through a round. And think about it. If you're picking in the middle of the pack, you've got to wait till pick number 48 till you get a shot at a player, because 32 in the first round, halfway through the second round, you get a pick. But we're talking about not picking until the 4th round, and they're picking last or close to the bottom of the 4th round. You can do the math on this. That's 4 times 32. That's your first player.
128. Yeah. So here's where they did pick up picks. They have 2 in the 4th round, their own. And Carolina's acquired in the Marty Necas Jack Drury deal as part of the 3-team deal with Chicago, with the Hurricanes landing Mikko Rantanen and Taylor Hall from the Blackhawks. That took place in January of 25. They have 2 picks in the 5th round, and they have 4 picks in the 7th round, their own, and the selections originally owned by the Rangers, Penguins, and Senators. They currently have $3 million in cap space before that goes up. The UFAs, Yoel Kiviranta up front, Brent Burns, Brett Kulak, Jack Ashan, and Nick Blankenberg on defense. And their RFAs, Jack Drury and Zakhar Bardakov, who had 1 goal and 10 points on the back line in 60 games. So there's a lot to unpack here, partner.
A busy summer for Chris McFarland, the GM of the Avalanche, and his staff. I would think of these free agents, the first guy they want to get on a contract is Jack Drury, because his stock went way up this year. He was a very, very good piece to the Avalanche in that checking role and chipping in some scoring at important times. It'll be interesting to see where our buddy Brent Burns ends up, turning 41 this coming year, but in the shape of a 21-year-old and still dedicated to the game. I would be surprised if he doesn't play somewhere, and it would be nice to see him back on the Avalanche, but there's a lot of work to be done.
You watch this team about as close as anybody that I know this year, and you saw them fall short in devastating fashion with the expectation that they had. What is your first priority with an older team, with the star power that they have, but knowing that it's going to be hard to build this club up through the draft, given what we just spoke about, and given the free agency?
Well, the one thing you don't want to do is anything stupid. For example, fire Jared Bednar, start to tear it down, start to do things that don't make sense. You've still got, I'm going to say this, you've still got the best team in the league. I really believe you've got the best team in the league. Maybe not the best playoff team this year, but the best team in the league. It's proven by who's there. You've got McKinnon, who's probably going to be the MVP of the league. You've got Makar, who's probably going to win the Norris Trophy. You might need to go and do a few changes. Maybe you want a different goaltender than the lumberyard of Blackwood and Wedgwood. Maybe you try to do something there. Maybe you try to trade for one younger guy, 2 younger guys, try to sign a younger guy. But remembering that you're still at the top of the totem pole with this team, and you don't want to do anything that brings you back to the pack.
Given their age, given the fact that this team last won 4 years ago, how much of a window do they still have? It's still wide open. I don't want to make it sound like I'm a doomsayer here, but how much realistic window does this team still have with the current core that they have?
I think 2 to 3 years. Nate McKinnon is going to be still great for that long. Makar is going to be still great for that long. Brock Nelson's not an old guy. Brent Burns is the only old guy here. I mean, we don't have a lot of 37-year-olds. So I think they got 2 to 3 years to find another Stanley Cup. And as I said, it should have been this year.